thanks everyone for coming. This is our second webinar. It's quite exciting. The first one we did with Frank Burris talking about his tour about Prince in Minneapolis, Prince the artist, which was a lot of fun and quite insightful. And so we thought we would just kind of keep going with these. And today we're going to be chatting with Jo Eckardt, who is based in Berlin, runs a tour company. And we're going to get into the process that Jo's gone through, starting with her first tour way back in, I think it was 2015. And as of today, she's actually published 2 tours today, which brings it up to 13 tours. So Jo is quite a publishing machine, and I think it'll be nice to pick her brain today and just to find out how she goes about it, some of the pressure points, some of the rewards of the process. So these are some of Jo's tours here. You can find them by just going to VoiceMap, searching for Berlin or some of the other destinations. She just published 2 in some smaller towns, one in Rostock, one in Meissen. But we'll get into that shortly. So I'm going to stop sharing this. And let me just bring this up 1 second. All right, Jo. So just before we start, sorry, if everyone can just keep themselves on mute, and we will be giving some space for questions at the end, where you can just raise your hand. But yeah, without further ado, Jo, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jo Eckardt. I grew up in West Germany, in Bonn, and I then moved to the United States, and I lived in New York for almost 20 years. And in 2001, I came back to Germany, to Berlin, and I didn't find a job right away, so I started my own touring business, and it went well, surprisingly. And so I've been doing that. I also do other things, though. I write books and things like that. And but basically, I established a company called A Friend in Berlin, and I've been doing that since 2011. And that's how I got into this, and that's how VoiceMap found me, I think, back in 2014. When they contacted me and asked me if I could do an audio tour. That's how I started doing this.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about that first tour? How you came to put it together?
So back then, I think it was actually 2014. I thought that I liked the idea of doing these audio tours. I thought that was a great idea. So I said yes, and I was lucky because my son at the time was 17. I think he had a microphone system, pretty professional. So I thought I was able to do that with a good quality. And I just used a tour that I would do with my clients, the kind of a walking tour that I would usually do. I thought I would just take that and do it with, with the map as an audio tour. And that's pretty much what I did. Not exactly, because usually my walking tours are 3 hours, and it wasn't that long, but it was long. I think, in looking back, I think it was too long for an audio tour. But that's what I did. I did have scripts, because I also, at that point, I already had guides who worked for me, and so I had prepared a script for the walking tour. So it was not that difficult to come up with the text and the tour and the path that we took. So I did that, and then it was published, and then it was, I think, 6-7 years that went by that I didn't touch that anymore. And over the time, I think people, after a few years, they started complaining that the tour didn't work very well anymore, because some of the there was construction, there were other things that were in the way. So some people said that the tour doesn't really work anymore, until it came to a point where it was really obvious that it needed to be changed. And that's when I think you approached me again. Should I just continue? Or
yeah, go for it.
And that's when you approached me and said, we need to change this tour. Can you do an update? And so I had been hesitant all these years of doing more or doing the tour again, because it was kind of difficult with the microphone and all of that. And my son wasn't there anymore, and I thought, I can't duplicate that. I don't have a way of doing this professionally, until you told me that that's not necessary anymore, and I could do it with my mobile phone. And that was great news and very nice, because that made it so much easier. So I thought, okay, great. Well, then I'll do the tour again, but differently. And I thought all along that it was way too long. So I thought I'll cut it into pieces. I'll just take one piece. And the first tour I did was just the Berlin Wall, because I thought that that's probably what people think about when they hear about Berlin most. So that's what I did. The first tour I did was a little less than half of the original tour, maybe a third. And I did that. So that was my first tour after those 6 or 7 years. And I used part of the script that I don't even think I used that script. I didn't look at it again. I just came up with a new script, but the way we walk was pretty much the same. And then I thought, after that was finished, it took a while, because I was kind of new again to this whole process, and now you also asked for a lot of testing in between, which wasn't the case so much in the first time. So it took a while, but after it was done, I thought that I actually liked the process, and I wanted to do the rest of the tour also, the one that had the other parts. So then I added 1 or 2 more tours, from the Reichstag to Potsdam Square, where the wall tour starts, and then the wall tour ends pretty much at Checkpoint Charlie. So I did a third tour that goes from Checkpoint Charlie through the center of East Berlin. So those 3 parts together were pretty much the one long tour that I had done first.
Got it.
And yeah.
And pretty much from there, you went straight on to publish 6 tours in 2 months. You're now on 13 tours.
Right.
I know you mentioned the Berlin loop that you kind of set up. Was that from the start? That was something you'd kind of look to do, or it was just kind of came about now when you wanted to make?
Well, I mean, when I did the first tour, I just thought I'll try this one once more and see how it goes. But I like the process. I actually, the more tours I do, the more fun it is. The more I like it, and the easier it gets. So I think from the beginning, I had in mind that I would add the other 2 parts, so that the original tour would be kind of duplicated again. And then when I was doing that, I always like doing Potsdam tours. I don't know how familiar you are with Berlin, but Potsdam is really close. It's like a half an hour drive from here. And I love Potsdam because it's so pretty. And so I always felt that was my favorite tour when I was still doing tours. I don't do tours that much anymore myself. I have guides who do them. But when I do, Potsdam was always my favorite too. So I thought that would be nice to do a tour there also, because it's small. It's a lot smaller. It's just the old town is just one tour, and then there is the nice park, which is beautiful. So I thought it would be nice to do these 2 tours also. So I did those two tours, and then I thought, if the Berlin tour ends, right now I end at the Museum Island, and you can continue from there. And I thought I want to add another, so I added a 4th tour in Berlin, which is the medieval section of the town, which is the part that most people don't know about. When you think of Berlin, you always think of, World War II history and the wall and all of that, but you don't think of Berlin as a medieval town that much, because there isn't actually that much left, but enough. I thought it was enough to make it interesting, so I added that. And that's how I think that's pretty much the 6 tours that I did, that you talk about within a fairly short amount of time. But it was also, I think that was in October, November, which is a time when there are not that many tours, so I'm not that busy during those months. So, which is why all the pictures that I did are kind of bleak and wintry. I have to go out and take a few more photos so that they look nicer.
Get the Berlin in the spring.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how I did those 6 tours, and then I decided that then I wanted to do a few in German, because I know that most clients, users of VoiceMap, listen to the tours in English, but I thought it would be nice to actually do some more Germans also, so that Germans would get into this. So and hear about it. And because I've actually done a few of those tours with friends of mine, and I said, well, like, let's go to Potsdam and do a nice walk, and I can test my tour. And they liked it, but they weren't that good with the English, so they kept asking me, well, don't you do that in German? Why don't you do it in German? So I started to translate a few of the tours, which is easy because there's a feature, duplicate the tour, and you just have the same tour, and then you can redo the whole script in a different language. So that's why then I think I have about 3 or 4 German tours now also, that at this point don't get a lot of sales, but it's something for the future. I think it has definitely potential, and so hopefully.
After English, German is the next biggest language. English is still definitely the biggest by quite a way, but we're definitely seeing more and more German users on there. So if any existing publishers out there think that are interested, might be worth looking into translating your tour into German. But we'll touch on the translations in a little bit. So I wanted to kind of dial it back a bit and let's go through the process of how you map your routes. You told me you have a kind of set process that you go through for each route, where you'll kind of walk it first. Do you want to just walk us through that?
Well, the first thing I do, and I've done a few more tours now with smaller cities that are nearby that I like a lot, that are, like Meissen and Warnemünde and Hamburg. So when I decide I want to do a tour, first I do it on the computer. I think about, I look at the map, I think what will be a good tour, and then I actually use this different app. I don't know if anybody knows that it's called Komoot, but I think there are lots of different kind of hiking apps that are out there with maps, where you can very easily map, or maybe you can even do it with Google. I'm not sure. You can just map the route that you want to take, and then you can store it, and then you can go out and actually do it, and it records the way you walk. So that's what I do. I take, once I've decided kind of how, like for example with Potsdam, I had an idea, the Potsdam Sanssouci Park, I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I mapped it, and then I went out and I saw that it didn't work, and I walked a different route. And then Komoot, this other app, just recorded exactly how I walked. And with that app, you can also take pictures in that very location. So it will show you the picture exactly in the location. So I walked the whole route that I thought was good in the end. And then I went back home, and I looked at that. I opened the, on the computer, I opened the Komoot file, and with the pictures and everything. And then in the other window, I had the VoiceMap map that I opened, and then I started to map the route and click on the location. Wherever I took a picture, I marked a location. And then once I have that, that's the first big thing, I think, is to map, to find a route that you want to take, because it has to be, I find that for me, it's ideal to be between 2 and 3 kilometers. And it has to be, and then I have about 25 to 30 locations on that route, and they should, sometimes you can't avoid it, but if you can avoid it, obviously to avoid long walks where people don't see anything interesting and they just walk and walk and walk down a street. So I try to think of ways that are more interesting. And so that's the first part. And when once I have that mapped out pretty well with the locations, then the second part is the text, coming up with the script. And I do that actually pretty chronologically from the beginning, step by step. And here it depends. Like in Berlin, obviously, like I said, I have lots of scripts for Berlin, so I had stuff to pick from. When I go to a different place like Warnemünde or Meißen, I had to pretty much come up with this from scratch. I read a few books, or I also do research on the internet and on Wikipedia and everywhere, and I find I come up with a script. I do one location at the time, and
do you break that up into kind of days, or will you when you say one location at a time, are you going in, entering the script for one, come back to that?
It depends. I think sometimes when I'm very busy, then I can just do 2 or 3 at a time. But other people aren't. They have to concentrate and focus more and stay focused for an hour or 2. So I can also focus really well in just like 20 minutes, 30 minutes when I have the time, and then go do something else. But lately, I think I've been doing them pretty much successively within 2 or 3 days, maybe, to do a script for one tour. And then I send it to the editor, and they look through it, and they're very good with finding, you know, like what works and what doesn't work so well, and with suggesting better formulations and better. And so we write back and forth a bit, you know, and they suggest things, and we change it a bit until in the end it gets approved. And then the third step is to do the actual audio recording, which I find now has gotten so much easier, you know, because you can just do it with your mobile. And so, yeah, that's how I go about that.
Yeah, a lot of people comment on how great your voice sounds for the audio tours. How has your process of recording changed? I mean, if you don't have to get too technical with it, but are you, what is your general setup when you record, just for tips for
yeah
publishers?
Well, I was actually surprised when people kept saying that about my voice, because I was never aware of that at all. So I'm just happy that it works and people aren't put off by my voice. But I was told, actually, I think when Ian met me in person, he said my voice sounds different when I talk. Or maybe I do have a special voice I put on when I start recording. I'm not sure. I just actually do the thing with the blanket that you suggested. I think in the beginning, I sent you a few audios, and you kept saying, it's not quite right yet. Come closer to the microphone. So I actually have it this close to I have this little tower that I put it on right here, and then I speak like just like 5 centimeters away from it. And I do put the blanket over it, which was okay in November and December, but lately I've been doing it, and it's hot outside. It gets a little hot, but yeah, that's how I do it. I remember the first tour when the Berlin Wall tour, when I did that, I felt like I had to do a perfect audio, so I kept stopping my recording again and again, you know, until it was kind of perfect. And so it took a long time to do the very first recording, because it took like maybe 7 or 8 attempts before I was happy enough with one that I sent to you. But that has changed a lot too, because now I do it pretty much in one go. And when I do say something wrong or stumble or mispronounce something, I just say, sorry, I'll do it again. And then I just start again. And I don't even go back to the beginning of the location, but I just redo the sentence, knowing from experience by now that you're really good with cutting this, so that people will never know that I stumbled. So that makes it much easier, because then I can really do the whole recording in like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, we've always find people when they get to the recording part, especially for most publishers who've never actually recorded their voice, it seems to be the one part of the process that really scares people. But I think, we like to send people examples of really recorded tours like yours. And it's really just about being comfortable, having fun with it, and not making it this very removed. People are getting to know you as well as the city that you're taking them around, or the area you're taking them around. So it's kind of just framing it with this personableness in mind, this authenticity, and not making it this very removed narrator and very overly professional. So we always try and encourage people to think of it as taking a friend around, and that hopefully kind of loosens them up a bit when it comes to recording. And I was just wanted to touch on, so the 2 tours you just published today were in different cities from Berlin. I know you'd mentioned to me before, Berlin, you'd kind of already come with this well of knowledge and roots in your mind, and how it all kind of connects together, especially when you were doing multiple tours in the city. And with the approach, like a tour in Rostock or in Meissen, how is that different? Where it's, you're not as familiar with the city, it, but is there a lot more research that goes into that, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, Rostock, the Warnemünde part, I know pretty well, because like I said, I have a lot of clients who arrive there, and when I still did my tours myself, I often went up there to pick them up. But Meissen, I had actually not been there. I was told about it a lot, how pretty it was. So I did a lot of reading. Yeah, I did obviously need to do a bit research, but then I think that in the end, I mean, this is not a scientific treatise that I'm writing. I'm writing for tourists like me, and I know, what I'm interested in and what I like and what I would expect from a tour. That's pretty much how I look at it. I write it like for myself, like what interests me, what do I find fascinating, and so, I mean, I actually work with Google a lot. I have the map of Google, and with Google, they always have little explanations about every spot where you are. And then there are always comments of users who post pictures and stuff that they like about that location. So I read that a lot. I read other stuff in Wikipedia. I read guidebooks. So, and then I try to get people, like both in Meissen and in Hamburg, I got people who live there, who, and ask them to listen to it, so I don't say something that's completely wrong. But so I'm not maybe the expert on Meissen, because but I think that I caught everything that's interesting for people who don't know the place, and so I hope that it works okay without being from there myself. I think, yeah.
It's interesting because it can, with tours like that, it can sometimes run the risk of just being a kind of, this is this building, this is when it came about, this is this person, but you do seem to kind of get a narrative thread throughout the tour. So, whether it's Meissen or Rostock, you kind of get a sense of how this town grew, through seeing these sites along the way. It doesn't feel like it's just a collection of
Right.
locations where you that live in isolation.
Yeah.
It kind of
Right.
all lends itself to a narrative, which is, we found the best tours really do that. There is a narrative thread that you can refer back to, stories that you mentioned, and landmarks that people have seen, or characters that you'd talked about, and build this kind of arc over time. And I think that can be, sometimes it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, but it can be the hardest part, is to figure out, how do I get some kind of arc that we're starting here,
Right.
both physically but also kind of psychologically.
Right.
This is the start of the tour, and this is where it ends, and over that course we've traced an arc of the story that you're trying to tell, whether it's the history of the town, or
I think it's definitely, I think the one thing that interests me in all these places is the history, and I love the Middle Ages, and I love the 18th century, and I liked to, I don't know, imagine what it was like then, and I think I try to convey that somehow, to give the listener an idea of what this place looked like and what it used to be like 200 or 500 years ago. And so, history is definitely the one thing that, more than, I mean, there are other guides who are more interested in architecture or art or something, but my thing is history, I guess, and I guess that comes through in my tours that I do. That's the aspect that I like. And I think if you really are fascinated by something, then maybe you're better at conveying this, making this transport over, so that if you love this, and then somehow they get it too.
Yeah, your passion kind of has to come through in that for sure. It's to feel authentic. And so now you've written these, and then with the testing, how useful do you find it when you're testing the tours? Do some things click where you're like, oh, okay, this makes much more sense on the ground, or when you get other people to test the tour? Sometimes when you can't make it to the city.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very useful. I think that with the testing, I mean, the first tour that I did was the Berlin Wall tour. I actually had to go a few times before everything was really worked well, and the problem there also was that I go through the Sony Center, which is an open space in a way, but it has a roof on top. So I think the GPS didn't work quite well, and I didn't realize that. So we had to do a few adjustments there. So that you won't know that unless you actually walk it and test it. And also, I think with the timing, like sometimes, I mean, you always have the script to fill out, and it always tells you how many words you can use, and that's a good, I think that's a good idea in general. But sometimes you say, well, let's stop here and talk for a while, and then you get going again, and then it's then you don't know exactly how much time you have left after you start walking again. So for those kinds of situations, I think it's good to test the tour and make sure that in the end it works. You don't want to talk when you arrive at the next location, and you don't want to stop too early. Or if you do, I mean, I think it's fine too. I mean, I don't talk the whole time, all the time, but then you just need to say something like, walk to the bridge up front and I'll join you when we get there, or something like that, so that they know what to expect. So yeah, I think testing is good. But I think that it's also good that you have this feature where first the computer voice talks.
Text to speech, yeah.
Right, yeah, because like for example, I'm planning on going to another cute little town near here in the Harz Mountain, and I want to spend 3 days there, and I want to start a tour there and do the testing, and I can do it with that recording there. I can type in the text and tell it to do the voice thing, and then I can test it while I'm there even. So that's a good feature too.
And I probably know the answer already to this, but we've tried to kind of bolster out our tutorial section over time. Do you ever use that? Have you found it useful?
I did in the beginning, but I mean, I don't use it anymore now.
Yeah.
So I don't remember it too well, but I think in the beginning it was very useful. Yeah.
And I mean, the process so well now. I mean, do you still find, what are some of maybe more the pressure points of the process? Is there a point where you're like not looking forward to this? I mean, you seem to enjoy the writing. You seem to have got the mapping down. Is there any part of it that still?
I actually like all three. Like all these 3 sections, I like a lot. I mean, it's really like, I really like doing this. It's like my new hobby. I love doing it. The mapping, I really like. It's like a puzzle, figuring out, well, I can take this route, and that's fun. And the writing, I like writing, and the recording turns out to be fun too. So I like all those 3 aspects. I can't even think of anything that I don't like about it. Well, I think the final touches in the end, that's hard to come up with a good text. I mean, I think I can write well. But when you have to write in a certain way, like to capture, I don't know, like certain aspects within 5 sentences. It's always easier to write more if you have to write a short text. I find that always more difficult. But there, I think the editors are very good with helping, and I find that they changed a lot more in the final touches than they do during the, like the actual script. They don't change much at all. But with the final touches, they do change it. But it's always for the better, so that's good that they help out there.
Yeah, we try and put a lot of effort into the final touches to really it's what people will see when they're going to decide to purchase your tour, and so it's something we've started putting, not too long ago, started putting a lot more time into, and really trying to get the most out of it, especially also with SEO. So it helps with when your tour showing up in search rankings, and so we're also trying to work out how to make it easier for publishers. We've just started doing a template now, but we see it as kind of as important as the tour. It's kind of rounds off the package. And you briefly touched on the editors. I mean, how do you find working collaboratively with an editor? Do you find it adds value? Do they get in the way ever?
I love working with her. I work with Alicia mostly. She's great. She's very quick. She always responds right away, and she's very good with making suggestions and improving things. And I appreciate that. I think that's great. Much better than if I was doing that all by myself.
Yeah, and especially after a few tours, because you always generally, publishers will work with the same editor, and we think part of what's great about that is you develop this kind of cadence with the editor as well.
I think so. Yeah, I think she knows my style now, and we work together really well.
And so you mentioned briefly that you'd been translating, I think it's 3 tours now into German.
I think I did the Hamburg one. I did one in Berlin and 2 in Potsdam. 4. I've done 4, yeah.
And you mentioned to me when we spoke the other day, when you're translating, and it's almost more of an adaptation as much as a translation, just because certain things are not going to need to be explained or translated.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I do. I when I do a translation, I duplicate the tour, and then I go in each location, and I take the English that I as the basis, and then I take it from there. And I translate a lot, but not everything. Like I said, in the Warnemünde thing, I have a thing about the German health insurance system that I don't do in German, because people know how that works. I don't need to tell them. So, and also about history, some of the things I don't need to explain that well, even though not everybody knows the history, even Germans. So, but I do. It's not a one-to-one translation, and because also Germans, I think I'm sometimes maybe interested in different things, but it's still pretty much. I mean, I do use the English as the basis, and then just try to adapt it to make sense for Germans to listen to. Yeah.
And I was going to just touch on updates, but it kind of leads me into a point of, when you're building these tours, do you kind of keep in mind the future proofing of, like, okay, this might not be around. You're obviously not really talking about places that are going to be closed anytime soon. A lot of it's landmarks or where events of history have happened. Do you have that in mind when you're building a tour? Like,
yeah, I mean, I remember, I don't know if you don't know about that, but in Berlin there's been a change in government, and there's this one street called Friedrichstraße that is a main street in Berlin. And it was, when I did the tour, they had just turned it into a pedestrian zone. And I said that. But then came a different government, or whatever the reason was, and they decided to reopen it for cars. And then I think adjusted it again. And then they've turned it back into a pedestrian zone now. And now we have a new government again, and they are going to reopen it. And at this point, it's like, it doesn't make sense to keep adjusting it every 6 months, because
different government
decides to do it differently. So I think at that point I just said, well, you know, they don't seem to be able to decide whether they want this to be a pedestrian or not. So whichever way it is, when you listen to this, that's the way it is for now. So sometimes you can say something like that to circumvent having to readapt it every time. But yeah, like I said, the other thing is there was a big construction site that stopped one path for one of the tours, and when I noticed that, I did do an addition, and I do know that I have to go and check to see if this construction is still there. So a few of these things, I think, yeah, you need to every now and then adjust. I think that the users, I mean, they can see that if for whatever reason they opened a street and they have a construction, they can probably figure out that is a temporary thing. But I think they would be annoyed if it was like I know that one guy does a tour in Berlin, a colleague of ours, who says that they have to go behind the Reichstag, but that's permanently closed, so you can't go there anymore. So I think that's bad, because I've read some reviews that the people have written, and they were very annoyed that they walked all the way back there and then they couldn't go through there. So I think if you catch that, then you should change it. So
Yeah,
that, you know.
we always try and kind of stress with the you know, a lot of people, obviously, that it's the content that you're going to be writing, the script, but the route is, you know, just as important, obviously, for logistical reasons, you know, maybe ending off in a place where it makes sense to, starting the tour in a central spot that's easy to identify, but also the route along the way. And when I did a tour I'd worked on in Coimbra in Portugal, and the content was great, really loved it, but the route was so memorable because I never would have found that route otherwise. You know, it's almost like the route is kind of what I remembered more from that. It really took me along places I would not have kind of otherwise had to go. If I had to choose a route that I would have wanted to walk, that kind of did that for me. And so we really try and not stress, but you know, drive home the point that the route is as much you know, of importance as what you're telling along that route.
Right.
And so whether it's thinking about logistics and construction, or this might change or that might change, it's also what will kind of stick in people's minds, and would they have come along this route otherwise if I hadn't have taken them along it.
Right.
And so you're a tour operator as well. How do you see self-guided tours in relation to the in-person tours you do? I mean, you clearly don't see a conflict. I mean, do they complement each other?
Yeah, I think in the beginning that's a worry, and also I've been asking a few of the guides that I cooperate with in different cities if they would consider that. And I think that's a fear that, well, if I do the tour and it's great, then people will just buy the tour and not hire me as a private guide anymore. But I don't think that that's true, because I think it's different types of clients who do the private tours, because the private tours are people who, you know, they're different. They like their luxury. They like to have a nice car that takes them around. They like so I'm not worried about that so much. And what I sometimes do now is, when like I said, I don't do tours myself anymore, but I have a lot of guides who work for me. But I do the correspondence with the clients, and sometimes I tell them that. Or sometimes I actually give them a free audio tour, and I say, well, if you're interested, you can also do this tour. I mean, but that's because Berlin is very large and there's so much to do and to see. You know, my guides can do a 3-hour tour with them, and there's still, and then they still won't have seen the Nikolai Quarter, so I could still give that to them as a bonus. So it's a nice thing. I feel like I can give them a little something that they don't get from other guides or other companies. So yeah, I think it complements each other. For me, it works that way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think we can start winding it down. I mean, you've been pretty thorough with covering the process, and I think it would be great to open up to questions. But before we do you have any advice for potential creators, people who maybe are midway through creating a tour or were thinking about creating a tour?
Yeah, well, I don't. You know, I have a couple of guides in Munich that I keep telling them, why don't you do a tour? It's great, you know, it's so easy, and they just don't seem to be able to start. And I feel like I'm telling them all the time, well, just start mapping the tour, you know, just start using whichever app you have, you know, it doesn't have to be Komodo, it could be any, use an app and do the walk, just walk, you know, and then go and sit at home and look at the map that you, and the walk that you did, and then maybe then you get inspired to fill in, you know, like then you can start mapping it on VoiceMap, and it's a fun thing. Could look at it like a video game, you know, like a game somehow, to find the best route from here to there somehow, and then you can start filling in locations, and then maybe it'll just develop from there. Because I mean, I think it's like, I think it's a lot of fun. It could be a lot of fun if you don't have a lot of pressure, and you know, if you get stuck, they help you all the way with everything. So just don't yeah, it's not procrastination, but just don't be afraid. Just start somehow, or with whatever part that comes easiest to you, you know, or maybe other people have a bit easier time just starting to write a script or something. Just start and do one of the things, and then see if it takes you through, and if you get inspired. And
yeah, I think walking the routes, you know, you can record it. We also recommend a GPS logger that you can use to record a route. But just getting out there and starting to walk it, I think it's such a great way to start, because it,
right,
you know, obviously it's walking just kind of generates or start generating ideas, and you know, it's kind of working the senses, and it's, as opposed to just sitting down and thinking like, we've got so many ideas, where do I start? You know, taking a walk, just starting on a route and seeing where it leads you is a really great way to do that, to get that first step down. I can see some people got their hands raised up. I think just to wind off before we move to questions, do you have a favorite passage or a favorite location from a tour, that's something you'd like to read?
Well, since you asked me before, I did prepare something. So, yeah, I'm just going to read a short thing from the first tour that I did, the Berlin Wall, and I usually don't talk about myself that much in my other tours, but here I talk a little bit about what it was like that night on November 9th. So I'll just read that. Even though at the time I lived in New York, I happened to be in Germany that November. It was an exciting time because for a few months, East Germans had been demonstrating and demanding more freedoms, and they had begun to escape in large numbers. Something was happening and excitement was in the air, but still nobody would have ever thought of the Berlin Wall coming down. That was just so inconceivable. Then on November 9th, a press conference was given, and the spokesperson for the East German government read from a piece of paper that East Germans were free to travel. Journalists were confused and asked Schabowski what he meant. When? He looked at his paper, looking for the answer, not finding it, and said, immediately. As far as I know, it should be immediately. So everybody who heard this was stunned. Free travel immediately? First a few, and then thousands and thousands of people came to the checkpoints and demanded free travel, demanded that they be allowed to go through. The guards at first would not let them go, but then one after another opened the gate, and it seemed like half the people of East Berlin made their way to West Berlin. I was in Bonn, far away, but I watched the television all night, not believing what I saw. The Easterners were greeted by the Westerners, who had also gone out to see what was going on at the wall, and it was just one huge party. And that was the beginning of the end. Once opened, the wall could not be closed again. People started chiseling at the wall and even tearing down whole portions of it. The politicians in power had to step down, and soon the two Germanys reunited. So that was that.
Great. Yeah, it's such a great piece. Cool. Thank you,
Thanks.
Jo. I think that was really, really useful. I hope others felt the same. And so I think we can start opening up for questions. I think, Amy, you were the first to raise your hand. You want to give it a go?
Yes, Jo, thank you very much for sharing your process with us. And that passage was lovely.
Thanks.
My question, I've published 3 public tours and 3 private tours that I'm using for other purposes. And my biggest challenge has always been trying to find that balance between what I refer to as commentary. I think those of us who are professional tour guides have a sense of that. It's the talk and the audience that you're trying to reach, whether whether we highlight our own personal desires versus balancing that with marketability for the tour itself once the tour is complete, and whether or not that's going to reach the audience that would sell the most. And I've struggled with that, and I'd like to hear, Jo, your personal approach to it. You've talked a little bit about it, about what you would like to hear. So I know you've really gone down the path of your style and your personality, but I've been challenged by that because I'm a real nerd. I'm a true history geek, and a lot of the stuff that I love goes down into the nitty-gritty details. And I know that that's not necessarily something that appeals to the larger audience. So if you could speak a little bit to how you found that balance, and maybe Gary, because you had to deal with me as my editor, and challenged me on quite a few things that brought me to some better realizations, but just how to strike that balance, how to find that proper in between the deep dives that you really would love to do, that you might do in person, versus the more, I don't want to say generic, but the more generalized, more marketable type of storytelling.
Yeah, well, I think I know what you mean. I mean, it is difficult because you don't know actually who's going to listen to your text in the end. But I do have a lot of experience about the typical tourists, and they do know a little bit, but not too much. So I don't ever expect anybody to really know. I don't presume that they know many things. I mean, it's a little bit, like I said, I write books also about different things. I studied social work also, so I write books about other things. And I know exactly, like I write theory books for people, who study the same thing, and then I write books for the people, general people, and it's very different styles. So when I do the audio tours, it's more like I'm writing for the people. I write for people who I don't assume know that too much, but what I do assume is that they're interested in history. I mean, if they weren't interested in history at all, I don't think they would be listening to this audio tour at all. They would probably do something else. So I assume that they don't know a lot, but they would like to know certain things. So I just, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly if I have a way of explaining it that will help you make better decisions. But I just have this person in mind that is well-meaning and wants to hear interesting things that they didn't know about Germany and that they didn't know, but I assume that they want to know these things. So I try to explain things in ways that they can understand. And sometimes I hint at a few things for those who know more and who want to go deeper. Maybe I'll give a few hints that I hope they understand where, in which direction they could go if they wanted to go deeper. But in general, I think I do have this person in mind who just doesn't know a lot about German history in general. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions.
It does. It gives me some insight. It's difficult sometimes when you're creating a little bit in a vacuum. That's one of the reasons I love these types of workshops and webinars, because I don't have necessarily a basis of comparison unless I go out and I listen to everyone else's tours. And so my sense of scale in my head might not make sense to other people. So hearing everybody else's perspective is really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, just to add to that, we tend to say it quite a bit to publishers, but it's always better to be entertaining than exhaustive. I think, because a lot of publishers are so close to their material and obviously are so passionate about it, it's hard for them to come to step back and say, well, how can I present this in a way, in the format of an audio tour that's quite different from an in-person tour or a book, or in a way that is getting the information across, but that can also appeal to not the most amount of people. I mean, obviously you want to appeal to everyone. You're not always going to appeal to everyone, but you're not going to be able to cover everything. And ultimately people aren't going to walk away with every fact that you've gone through in every kind of instance in history. They'll never remember that. So that's why we said kind of the root and the content together comes together in a memorable experience. And I think too much of one, too much of the other, or too much of both can lead to an exhausting experience where you don't want the listener to kind of finish the turn and be like, wow, like I need a drink after that. That was like a lot of information, or that was just a lot to take in. You want to leave them kind of interested for more, as a starting point, to kind of jump into the city further and say, okay, this is what I've shown you. These are some of the possible, if you're interested in this further, these are some of the ways to now go explore the city further, or you maybe have other tours that kind of link on themes that are maybe more specified. So I do agree, it is a balance. It's not always an easy balance to find, but I think it is, the perfect tours to strike that balance, I think. So who else was Eliana, if I'm saying that correctly? You wanted to ask a question?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Well, yeah, actually my question could be both for Jo, and thank you so much for your insights. Really good material we're getting here. It could be for Jo or for Gary as well. Like I do some very, I like to think of them as very niche tours, because I combine sightseeing with awareness practices, like people experiencing the place from a place of presence themselves and so on. So my question is, like, have you, Jo, or have you guys seen this? Have you tried to do any voice map tours where there is some kind of interaction involved? Like you tell the user to stop and take some action on a location to get experience out of it. Like, have you had that experience, done that, and does it work at all? Like, I'm trying to make my tour like that, like now, but it has that interactive part that I don't know if it works for VoiceMap.
I guess when you say interactive, what, like, do you have something specific you could
yeah, like for example, like I was thinking of doing some meditation, like maybe an open eye meditation where you just sit there and see the things around you and don't get so involved with what it is going on, but just see everything and stay present. Like it is a little bit more elaborated than that, but that's an example, right? So, or maybe that I tell them that they could do some, like I show them how to do some tapping or something with a picture there of how to do it. Yeah, like, and in different locations, because the action they are taking has to do with the environment, with that what they have around. If, for example, there is a place that has gone under a lot of transformation, then the exercise maybe has to do with something of transforming your energy or transforming your view of something, that kind of thing.
I think that's an interesting concept. I think, I mean, to do something more interactively, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that some people would like that. I mean, I think it's definitely sounds.
Yeah, I know there is interest, because I have done these tours in person, and I have started to get some demand for it. But my question is, will they work in VoiceMap? That's the question, because they work in person. I know it because I've done it, and people is asking for them. I'm getting requests for them, but in VoiceMap, that's the thing.
I mean, the only thing I do is, like I say something like, well, look at this obelisk and try to decipher it. And so I give them a little or something to look for, and then I say something like, you probably laugh when you see that, because that's trying to do some. But I mean, what you're saying is a different dimension, is to actually lead them onto like a meditation, something. But try it. I mean, I'd be interested in trying it out. It could work.
Yeah, I would also. Yeah. I think in the right setting, scenario, and kind of how you're framing that, I think it could be an interesting exercise. I'm not sure how it would play out over a whole tour, but I think if you're picking certain spots where it can kind of tie in with the overall narrative of what you've been talking about, and use that as a way for the listener to come in and maybe discover something by you setting the scene for them to do that. I think that could be interesting. I'm not sure. I'd have to see in a specific scenario what the intention is there, but I think the idea is interesting, and we're up for trying something different, as long as it's kind of framed right, and the listener kind of in a way that the listener can clearly understand and get something from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm kind of a pioneer in this territory. I'll just keep trying, and then Alicia is doing a fantastic job coaching me and helping me. So thank you for that, Alicia. I know you're somewhere there. So I really have to leave now. I have another call, but thank you so much. It was so good, and I'm happy to be here with VoiceMap. It really looks like a very professional platform, and I'm going to keep trying.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you very much, Jo. And thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, Eliana. Great. And then Michelle, you have a question? This is Michelle Davis in Canada.
There. Okay. Now I think I'm on, yeah? Okay. So my question is, thank you, Jo, for everything. You mentioned that you had initially done a very long tour, and then you've kind of now broken it up a little bit. And I've actually been considering the same thing. I have the first tour I put out was 90 minutes, and it's getting good reviews, and it's all good. We have a much smaller city than and not as much deep history, so there's only so much to say. But I've been considering doing this, and I'm just curious if this is a good idea to take what I've already done and then change it and then take the original one out, or and ideally, how long in length is a good length of a tour?
Well, my original tour was, I think, almost 5 kilometers, like 4.7 kilometers. So that was probably, I would say it was probably 90 minutes or so. I took it down completely because it also didn't work anymore, because there was certain routes that you couldn't walk anymore because of construction or whatever, or they put something in between. So it had to, it's no longer available. So I mean, it sounds like if you're thinking of breaking it up to make it two separate tours, and then see if you can find a way how to split it into two equally interesting tours. Yeah, I think that people in general, I don't know, I would, I also travel, and then I look at VoiceMap, and what I look for is tours that take about an hour. I think that's a good length. It's about 3 kilometers, 3.5 kilometers maybe at the most is a good length of a tour. But that's for me. I don't know. Other people may. I mean, in the end, the idea that I have is that if people had only one day to see Berlin, they could do all my 4 tours in one go. It would be a long walk, but I mean, that's what you do when you're on vacation and you have a lot of time. You walk for 5 or 6 hours, so they could do that theoretically. But I don't think anybody, not that I'm aware of, that anyone has ever done that. So I think that people do like smaller sections. Good luck with that.
Yeah, to just jump in on there. So we used to think, okay, well, people would only want to walk so much, and most of our tours are generally between the minimum 2 to usually up to 5 kilometers. But we do sometimes get people leaving comments saying, "Oh, I wish there was more. I loved it." And so some people do want to have these kind of 90-minute tours. So I think it's finding a kind of balance in there as well. Taking a longer tour and splitting it up, it can work, I think, but you got to be careful of kind of making it in such a way where the 2 tours can stand on their own, because you want to avoid having people end up doing the 1 tour and then they're not even looking at the other tour because I've already done this, or I'm starting the tour, I can only start from the second tour, so I wasn't able to do part 1 as such. So we used to frame tours as this kind of part 1, part 2, part 3, but found that people were not actually going to be doing all the parts, and so framing it in a way where these tours can stand on their own allows people to not feel they're leaving out something if they just take the one, or and they're not end up buying either of them because they could only do the second one or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a way to break them up around theme or area of a city, then that can work. But I think unless you really feel the tour is overly long and you've gotten feedback from that, I would be hesitant to just break it up because of that.
Okay. Thank you.
And Clive in Australia. How's it
Hi
going,
everyone,
Clive?
how are you going? I'm well. Hi Gary.
How's it going?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Joe. Great feedback.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Got a lot out of that. I've been doing driving tours with Gary, and it's been great. Now I'm getting into walking tours, and I noticed that you were talking about Kentucky, or the next version of VoiceMap. What has that got in it that is better than the last release?
Are you referring to Athens, the release that just came
Yeah,
out?
Athens. Yeah, sorry. My apologies, Athens.
So we've just made, the way the user kind of interacts with the screen a lot, and with the app itself, just a lot kind of smoother, more, there's more to show, so you can read the full script now. The way the route line looks in the map is much more different. We've got a list of features that we put out, and we just we put a release out about that. But we found it's just a much better user experience overall, and based on feedback we've got from users. And we're soon going to be releasing some other features that are going to come out soon, but I won't talk too much about it yet. But be something like different location types on top of the location that we have now, manual playback locations. But we're kind of constantly iterating the app, taking in the feedback, always testing the app, and seeing how we can improve the experience.
Question for you, Joe. Have you used this latest version?
I don't even know. I think you need to update on the app, right? I'm not sure.
I got the understanding that you doing your apps a lot faster now, rather than quite slowly when you first did them a few years
compared
back.
to 2014, yeah. You mean?
In terms of the updates.
Yes.
We try to release, whenever we're always looking at bugs, that there's issues that we can solve there, and so we'll push out releases for that. And then whenever we have kind of new features that we're introducing, so I think that cadence is going to get quicker as we have quite a long list of features we want to work on. We're a small team, but we're all working on that.
I can speak briefly about version 10 if you like.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm kind of jumping in at the end here, but I think, Clive, for driving tours in particular, version 10 has some really nice improvements. Gary mentioned the route line and the way that now reflects where people have been, where they're going to next as a solid red line, and then the rest of their route, and kind of updates to show their progress, is useful on a walk, but much more like the experience you have with Waze or Google Maps when you're following their navigation. And so for driving tours, I think this is going to make a bigger difference than it does for walks. Then we also now show the radius around the location. So there's that circle. That was happening kind of in the background before people didn't know it was there. And so we're trying to take some of it takes people a little while to trust the app, to trust that the playback's going to work, to start ignoring it. And so that interface is hopefully there to kind of reduce that time so that people feel comfortable and are more immersed in the narrative and less worried about navigation as soon as possible.
Thank
but I
you.
mean, it doesn't make any difference. You know, we would never make a change that would then require us to go back and retrofit all of the content, because that would be an own goal. Of quite a big own goal.
No, thank you. Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if it was making a difference to the speed of the process, because Jo was putting a lot of tours quite recently, as by comparison to what she was doing a few years ago, and I was wondering if that update VoiceMap Athens was a part of that process.
No, that's just Jo, I think.
Okay. Okay, just getting more efficient.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think MapMaker has had some real improvements to it too, and that helps a lot. But really, it's Gary, Alicia, and the rest of the editors that I think are at the center of what makes it kind of appealing and possible to publish a tour without having to go through a lot of trial and error.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Clive. See, just 2 more questions. Yeah, Amy, you got another question?
I do, hopefully really quick. It's regarding translations. I don't have the multiple languages as Jo does, so she would have the advantage of being able to not only translate, but to read her translated app script in her own voice. Is it only practical to consider translations in that case? Or if I have, for example, friends who do speak, say, for example, Spanish, if I would be able to have someone else read in the additional language, is that not advised, or is that something that should be considered?
Yeah, we have done that before. We usually so the way we can tackle that is in a few ways. One, we would have play a bit of your audio at the beginning of the tour, so they hear your voice initially, and then it kind of fades into the narrator who's going to be narrating in that other language, and also the narrator stating, I'm so and so narrating this tour for Amy McMahon. So yes, it's totally, obviously we know not everyone's going to speak multiple languages and be able to translate their own tours. So we've kind of developed those methods behind doing that, in terms of just letting the listener know this obviously isn't Amy McMahon, and this is who's translated the tour for and who's speaking in her voice essentially. So yeah, if you have a friend who's able to do that, certainly we'd be all up for going ahead with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Lynn, how's it going, Lynn? Oh, are you there?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I needed to unmute. I think my question was what Clive's question was, Gary, and working on with the version 10. So the version 10 is in both the maker's side and also on the visitor side. It's on both sides, correct? Or just the maker's side, what we do, visitors 10, or excuse me, VoiceMap.
No, version 10 is just a version of the app, so it's essentially on the user side.
It's on the user side.
Yeah, MapMaker has been through many iterations. We don't kind of have a version number for it as such, but we're always kind of looking to release and iterate on the improvements. One of the things we've just included now is a checklist for that we found can be quite useful for first-time publishers when they first presented with the map. It gives them a nice little step-by-step of what the first step is to do, what's the next step to do, and eventually lead them up to recording. So yes, Athens version 10 is more to do with just the VoiceMap app and the user side of taking.
Okay, and so of all the tours that we've made in the past, they will all be version 10 now.
No, well, they will all work in version 10. Yes, it doesn't affect.
So if someone buys something today that is one of my older tours and they download it to their phone, it would be version 10, as long as they were in the most updated version.
Yeah,
a
well,
voice
the
map.
app will be version 10, but the tour will work the same, whether they have an earlier version of the app or not.
Okay. All right. I think so. It doesn't help us do this any faster unless we just have Joe's determination to do things faster.
Sure, or yours as well. I mean,
It still takes me a good
you're not
6
too bad
weeks to
yourself.
do one tour. But okay, so version 10 is basically when the person buys it, they get a better experience.
Yes, it's the experience in the app of actually of taking the tour, going to do the tour, whether listening to
Okay.
it virtually or being on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Joe, for everything. I mean, your experience is my experience. And thank you, Gary, and thank you, Ian, because when I started this 4 years ago, it was just on a whim because somebody told me I should do it. And I find it exciting, wonderful, and great to do, sometimes very frustrating and not so great to do, but everything turns out for the best in the end. And it's generates a nice little retirement income, got to admit. So, but I couldn't do it without the help of Gary and Ian. Honestly,
Thank you.
would not happen.
Thanks.
So that's all I have to say, and I have to go now.
Thanks, Lynn.
Have a great day,
You
Take
too.
care.
and keep making tours.
Great.
Thanks, Lynn.
Well,
Thanks. Okay. Can you exit me, Mike? Oops.
so I think that's it in terms of questions. Unless anyone else has any other questions, I think we can start winding it down. No? All right. Well, yeah, Joe, thank you so much. I think this was super
Thank
useful.
you. It was my pleasure. It was very nice to do this. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Joe.
everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, and
Marvin.
so and we've, as mentioned, we recorded this, so we will be posting this up, so you can watch it again if you've missed anything and want to get some more tips from Joe. But yeah, as always, reach out to us at editor@voicemap.me if you have any questions or any of the editor's personal emails. Yeah, we're always happy to chat about this. So thanks very much, guys, and yeah, we'll see you at the next one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Joe. Thank you
Thanks,
all.
guys.
Thank you, Ian. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.